Thank you. Welcome and good morning. Welcome to Safeguarding Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Item 1 then, apologies.
We haven't received any apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Item 2, any declarations of interest? No. Thank you. Item 3, minutes of the last meeting held on the 15th of February. Has everyone had the opportunity to read them and happy that I signed them as a true and accurate record? Thank you. Item 4 and into the first report, development of the Adult Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub, or MASH. I think we have Ruth Martin and Councillor Wilcox. Councillor Wilcox, did you want to open?
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, members. I'm joined this morning by Ruth Martin, who I'm sure is known to you all, and is the Principal Social Worker and Safeguarding Lead for Staffordshire County Council. So we're here today to get your views and comments on the new arrangements and development of the Adult Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub, or MASH as we know it. We're also keen to hear what updates and arrangements you would like to see going forward to your committee to ensure that you have all the information that will give you the assurance that the hub is operating effectively following the new arrangements that will be in place. So, Chair, if I may, give some members some background as to where we currently are. The Adult Safeguarding Team has been based within the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub, or MASH, since 2011. Originally set up to be a joint arrangement with children and adult services from both Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent City Council, along with the police, health and more latterly the probation service. Members, there have been a series of reviews and changes during this period of time, but it wasn't until Stoke Children's Services decided to lead the MASH back in 2019 that anything different was considered. We did in fact start a review at this time, but due to COVID-19 this was somewhat delayed. So, back in February 2023, after much discussion with the MASH Project Board, it was decided that there would be a separate MASH arrangements between Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire Adults and Children's Services. You will, I'm sure, all have been aware that during this time we were also looking at the safeguarding transformation, given that we were experiencing backlogs and delays, and we recognised we needed to improve the situation ahead of any discussion around moving to any new arrangements. The police had already taken the decision to separate adults and children's safeguarding function within their service and developing new structures and appointments. This led to a number of months where organisations were separately working on their own arrangements. We all know how important getting these new arrangements right first time to ensure that individuals get the right support and can feel safe and secure with any interventions that are made. Equally, it's important that knowledge, understanding and training is given to ensure that everyone who may come into contact with a safeguarding concern can feel confident to deal with this in a professional and understanding manner. Having the separation from children, we believe, will make the service better with concentration on adults alone, as opposed to dealing with both children and adult safeguarding issues. So, Mr Chairman, with your agreement, I will ask Ruth Martin to explain to the committee the new arrangements that we are considering, and we'll be grateful for your input as to these new proposals. Once Ruth has completed her presentation, we'll be happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you for that. Ruth, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee, once again for inviting me to come and speak to you. I think you've all had quite a lot of me lately, so hopefully this is going to offer you some further assurances, particularly during this period of change, that we have carefully considered the new arrangements, and hopefully going forward these will offer a sustainable approach to ensuring that we have the right approach to adult safeguarding at the earliest opportunity. As Councillor Wilcox has already explained, this has been reviewed over a number of years, so lots of options had been considered. So moving on then to the new arrangements. The Staffordshire Adult Safeguarding Team, or SAST, as you most probably have heard me talk about previously, are remaining based at Lindham House, where the MASH has been, alongside police colleagues. This will ensure that we are still co-located with children's services. So even though we're going to have those separate arrangements, we will still have those links and hopefully as well still those day-to-day conversations that I think we can all appreciate support good interrelations and you know, where if there are any concerns that involve children's services, we can deal with them still effectively. Further to this as well, we have expanded that adult section by including as well into that my adult safeguarding inquiry team. This team has previously been based at Staffordshire Police Headquarters alongside the Asset Police team as well, so it's been a co-located team. But we are moving both those functions, the police team and also my social care team, also up to the MASH, so that they are all working within that environment. And actually then, hopefully this will aid learning and development of all people who are responding to adult safeguarding concerns. One of the main points where we've had difficulties in the past is that the sergeants at the MASH were not experts in adult safeguarding. So by having dedicated sergeants working only within the adult safeguarding arena will mean then that we develop that skill base within Staffordshire Police alongside the adult social care colleagues. We're planning on things such as joint training and sessions together so we can learn and develop together. I don't want that to sound that Staffordshire Police, that I'm critical of Staffordshire's police response previously, just that I see this as being a good way for us to develop further. It will also help us to be able to identify even earlier those responses that we might need. So rather than having to wait, having people in the same room always means hopefully that we can respond in a more timely manner. Having those, having as well the police leads alongside adult social care leads, such as myself. Also, I'm not based there all the time, but will be based there part of the week alongside the senior police colleagues as well, will mean that those more strategic decisions can also be dealt with more effectively as well. And I think these are some of the things that maybe previously we haven't had. And actually for Staffordshire Police to take that decision to have an adult safeguarding function in its entirety, I think is a real benefit. And we are, you know, Staffordshire Police are one of the few that have really pushed this agenda, and we are so happy to be working with them to move that forward. Alongside Staffordshire Police, we are also still going to have our links in with our health colleagues, although we do mainly use the One Health and Care system to be able to get health information. We are working with our colleagues from the ICB and also MPFT to ensure that we've got better access at an earlier opportunity to the current information about individuals, and also again to discuss those. In the very early stages at the moment, we've got some discussions about having a health representative based with us from an adult's perspective in the MASH. That's at the early stages. I can't guarantee at this stage it's going to happen, but I think it's positive that we're having these conversations at this time. Some of the functions will remain joint functions. So, for example, the police research function will remain a joint function. So, again, we'll still have those links with children's services and those interrelations, which, as I say, I think will help. I think I've covered most areas. Just as well, just to assure you with things such as our position of trust response, which was one of our main links with children's LADOs, so the local authority designated officer for children's services works very closely with our designated adult safeguarding manager, which is the adults equivalent, and they are still both based within that MASH environment. So even though, again, we don't have those joint arrangements, that co-location will ensure that that still happens. And we're also taking this opportunity as well to refresh our position of trust, guidance, referral process, and we'll be redistributing that as well. Further to this as well, we are working with our housing colleagues out there in the boroughs as well, and also with the private providers of housing to try and bring them in. One of the areas that we often struggle with is, you know, those links with housing, which is so important, as we've spoken about before, particularly with elements such as self-neglect and also in a number of situations such as domestic abuse as well, where having those links in with housing colleagues will be so important. And actually we are getting really good engagement with them and working hopefully towards them being, whilst they might not be based within the MASH, they'll be having those links and be able to share information through our MASH arrangements. So the governance arrangements for this, obviously moving away from the project or the strategic meeting at the MASH, we have now set up an adults safeguarding strategic meeting. So that will be where, chaired by myself, and that will be where we bring partners together based within the MASH. And at the moment we are also including our Stoke-on-Trent colleagues into that as well, to make sure that there's some parity and to make sure nobody's missing out on anything as well. But they will be where we will discuss developments, ensure that we've got good processes and review that. We'll also be doing, and we have started those as well, some joint MASH audits as well, so that we can see the effectiveness of those arrangements and hopefully then be able to report on actually, are these arrangements that we've got in place effective? Are they doing what we want them to do? Though that information will be fed into the strategic meeting, along with we're going to set the sort of KPIs. We've got a meeting coming up. They're going to be very excited about a risk register and looking at KPIs. And that hopefully will give us a much better structure to be able to monitor that. That will then feed in from a local authority perspective into our quality and performance meetings, and also as needed into SLT, etc. And as we said at the start, we'd also like to hear your views on how you want these arrangements to come back to this committee as well. I think that's everything I wanted to say. So hopefully that's covered everything, but please do ask any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Val. Councillor Wilcox, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to reiterate it. One of the real big advantages of this new system will be that, and we've often talked about it in this arena when I've been on the other side as members, about the cooperation, about the sharing of information and having that early intervention and making sure that people know what's happening. I think the very fact that we're co-locating will mean that we can act, hopefully, in a much more speedier fashion. And when there are issues, we can share them with colleagues because we're in the same establishment, which I think is a real plus for us. So hopefully that information sharing will get better, and we'd like to see that this sort of arrangement can be mirrored elsewhere in the health arena, particularly with bringing in the ICB and the NHS. So it really is a step in the right direction as we see it, and we'll really have a close handle and make sure that we are not missing any of the issues that come forward, and having the children still there at the same time will help that sharing of information. So that's a real positive as far as I'm concerned, in actually having people being able to communicate easier and quicker and sharing of that information. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Just on that point then, and I think we all agree that there are some huge benefits to bringing all of those agencies together and all of those people and learning from experiences and sharing some of those experiences. And I think one of the issues that we've raised previously about Stoke-on-Trent moving away is what is the effect of that on things like intelligence? Because I dare say the borders around Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire weren't solid, and there must be some crossover somewhere. I suppose the point I'm getting to, not that we want to go back in any way, but are we happy, satisfied that intelligence function and that we have all of the information and actually we're not missing important parts that affect young people, adults?
Yeah, and I think that this is one of my main areas that as you know, I always speak openly with you all. I was very keen on the joint arrangements that we had with Stoke-on-Trent. But what we're doing, as I say, by including them as well in the moment in our strategic meetings, is trying to make sure that those very issues don't occur. We're both cognizant as local authorities of the potential for that to happen. We are at the moment as well still sharing the information sharing log, the ISL, that's the information sharing function within the MASH, and we're still sharing that with Stoke-on-Trent adults, so we'll still be able to share information in the same way. As we move forward and that changes, hence why it's still important to have those joint meetings, those joint arrangements in place until we can be satisfied that those new arrangements are not at the expense of information sharing that may then place adults at risk, which obviously is the thing we don't want to happen. And what I would say is we're still we still work very closely together. We still have a joint safeguarding board, as you're all aware, and at the moment those arrangements aren't changing at this time. And I continue to work very closely with my colleague Gina, the principal social worker over in Stoke-on-Trent. So we're very much aware of that. They'll continue to come to our strategic meetings until we're satisfied that those arrangements are safe.
No, thank you for that. I think probably long before my time, but I'm pretty sure that someone sat here a few years ago saying just how vital it was that the two areas come together and all the intelligence and all of that. And I'm sure they made very passionate arguments around that. So we just, but we are reassured from what you just say. Councillor Snape.
Thank you, Chairman. Ruth, 3 little points. You've answered a little bit in that one. The gap between children's services and adult services. When children become 18, a lot of the services really, in a way, drop off. Can we guarantee that there'll be no slippage between those who are 18 and those who are 21, really, as we move forward? I know we've got children in our care until 25, depending who they are, but there's no guarantee there. Can we guarantee that the computer services that are up and running, digital services, are fit for work from day one, really, because we can't allow anything to happen there? And the third thing is, you mentioned KPIs. As a scrutiny committee, we look at the good and the bad, as you know. Will you guarantee that you'll bring the bad to us as well as the good to us? It's a question we always ask, we want to know where things go wrong so we can learn from them as well. It's great when the good things come, but we don't always get various other organisations the bad things. We need to know those as well.
With regards to the transition of young people, so we are, as a local authority, reviewing our preparation for adulthood processes, and part of that will include, obviously, the safeguarding elements as well. I was in a meeting yesterday with the Deputy Director of Children's Services and some colleagues looking at pulling together some case examples to show what we need to do through transition and to develop the guidance around transitional work between adults, between children's and adults, and that includes those safeguarding elements as well. It is very difficult because of the way our laws are. So some adult safeguarding actually doesn't start until somebody turns 18, but it is that preparation for adulthood that we have to get right. So there is a lot of work around that at this time, and the MASH function will form part of that review. So I'm keen on that not happening, and one of the things that we have identified previously has been that where we're not aware before somebody turns 18 of previous safeguarding risks when people are children, because as adults workers, I don't know whether you know this, we can't see children's records. So I don't have access to children's records I have to then, sort of request that. There are some people who work in our preparation for adulthood team who do have that dual access, but we don't necessarily have that access. So that's always a consideration as to how we get that information. And that links in then with that information sharing when you say about the computer systems. So we're not changing how we currently share information. So at the moment, we can still get the information through the ISL. So for children's information, we will always request that information from children's, and they provide us that information. And that is the same, going forward. So we're not, as you know, making any changes to the ISL because of the fact Care Director is going to be changing in 5 years. So in some ways, that gives us the assurity that any changes aren't going to be overly affected because we're still using the same systems, we've still got access to the same records, and we'll still be working in that same way. And actually for, say, my safeguarding teams, that's then almost reassuring. It's less of a change, isn't it, if you're still using some of those same systems. And then with regards to reporting back to this committee, I hope I've always demonstrated, hopefully, that I will always come here and share the bad as well as the good. As I've said, I value this committee for that challenge and also actually for the support and suggestions that you have given us over the years, and I can't imagine that that would change. I think it's important to have that openness and transparency, and as well, with a number of these meetings as well being within the public domain, that actually there is that assurance that if things aren't going as they should be, we are open because we want to resolve them. That's always the most important thing. So absolutely, we will set out what the expectations are so you know what we should be achieving, and I will report on the situation as it is, the good, the bad. Yes.
I'd just like to say, really, it's great having Councillor Wilcox there, coming from his side to that side, so we know you understand what's going on. But also, I was part of the visit to the MASH, and I came away from there confident that things were improving, very, very happy, spoken to staff. They knew what they were doing, and that they're enjoying what they were doing, the way they came across from the moment, the emergency teams, all the way through the people we spoke to. It was really very, very assuring. Came away very, very happy.
Thank you for that. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. It sounds exciting. No, I wouldn't use the words exciting, sensible, interesting progression that you're coming forward with. I just wonder, though, on a bit of a negative side, maybe. Sorry. Because you're working together with organisations, if something should happen to go wrong, who takes the sole responsibility for anything that might go wrong? Because we tend to be a little bit of a blame culture when it comes to things like this. One organisation will blame somebody else for not picking something up. So it's good that you're working together, and hopefully this won't happen. But should it happen, is there sort of who will take the sole responsibility should something go wrong? I hope I've made that sensible.
No, and I think that is, again, a really important factor to consider. So some of this is down to the terms of reference that we're developing, and how then we review and we share some elements of risk dependent on the nature of the concern or dependent on how something's gone wrong. So for me, this comes down, as I say, to the terms of reference, but also to how we escalate as well some of these concerns within our organisations. A lot of this is down to the relationships that we develop, and we have a very good adult safeguarding board where we challenge and where we're challenged by our independent chair. That helps us as well to make sure that we're not misappropriating blame and not taking share of blame when we should be taking share of blame. It's very rare that one agency alone fails. And I think we have to recognise that this is always something that we work jointly on. that comes through with that acceptance, that support, and as I say, clear terms of reference and everybody accepting that. Now, the proof of that will be in the testing of it, but if we find ourselves in those situations. In more recent situations that we've been in, I think we manage those very well. We share responsibility, we review together, and this is a game where it's important for us to be doing joint audits, coming together, reviewing that, and looking at this situation as a whole. But I don't want to say it won't be foolproof and we won't find ourselves in that situation, but I'm hoping that we can lay the groundwork that leads to more successful working and management of situations like that.
Thank you for that. I just wanted reassurance, and I'm sure other members would as well want reassurance on that. I can just wish you all the success in, and hopefully, and it'll be interesting to watch what goes on as you progress on this way forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilcox, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, just to add that, to give some reassurance to members, I think most importantly, when things do go wrong, our first priority must be to put it right, and that we do all we can to put it right with the person that's been affected. We can then afterwards look at the learning from that, what went wrong, where the responsibility lies, but hopefully having that connectivity between all the partners together will build up that relationship between us, that we can actually jointly share those learning practices and make sure. But most importantly, when it does go on, what we shouldn't do is start attributing blame to anybody and not dealing with the matter in hand. So it will be really important that if something does go wrong, we act on it, we put it right, we make sure that the person is dealt with in the appropriate way, and then we can look at reviewing it once we've done that and put it right, and seeing where we could make changes, where things haven't happened. But a lot of the test cases have been used to sort of thrash this out to see exactly what could happen, where could issues come to the fore, and how can we deal with them most effectively. That means that the people affected are dealt with as speedily as we possibly can, and that's really most important for the people we're trying to protect.
Can I just add something? Just a question there as well. I think it's really encouraging that there are other partner agencies there. And I think what we've just been discussing there really is around that sort of better governance and who's in charge and the board and everything else. One of the criticisms that has been levelled at this local authority, I hate to say not with regard to adults, but certainly around children, is the lack of day-to-day supervision. And that is very different from the governance arrangements, isn't it? And I'm sure from the other police officers who are sitting in this room, if you introduce 2 police sergeants into something, from my experience and from my encouragement in the past, I've encouraged them to take control. Because if something goes wrong, we don't want the finger to be pointed at the police. I know that sounds very selfish, but that's the way it is. I suppose the question really here is, with all of these various agencies, and you will have 2 in particular that are dedicated to this, who's in charge on a daily basis? Who is making the decisions on a daily basis? And because if we have the right people in charge, I'm not suggesting for a second it ought to be police sergeants, but they will naturally fill that gap if no one else does. And actually, it is an essential part of the service that we deliver, because if it's supervised right at the beginning, it won't go wrong at the end, will it? You know, so and I read through this, and it's very encouraging that we have a board and that we have a strategic direction. But who's doing the telling on a day-to-day basis, I suppose, is my question.
Oh, it's always interesting, that, isn't it? And I've worked, because I started in the MASH when it first began, and I can honestly say I was scared of the sergeants. Sergeants were quite scary. I remember going up with my bit of paper, as it was at the time, sort of slightly shaking, going, "Excuse me, Sergeant, would you have a look at this for me?" Now, what's lovely is, you know, that's 13 years ago. That's a long time, isn't it? Gosh, how I've aged. But those relationships are so different now, and that joint working and those discussions that happen are actually a joint decision. So ultimate being ultimate in who's ultimately taking responsibility is often part of our discussion. So each case, who's taking the lead with this? Who needs to be making those decisions? And that's what we do through each case discussion. And actually then that means nobody is in charge, as it were, because it's a joint decision. So where something requires more of a police response, they take the lead. We then support doing what the police need us to do. Where there's more of a social care need, or where police are uncertain because of, concerns about somebody's capacity or circumstances. And I have to say, that side of things has worked well over the years and has developed over the years, and I don't see, and that's something we would continue to encourage. I would agree, working with the police, they do, because they're very good at it, take control and organise very well. And when something needs that very immediate response, quite often the police will be the lead. But that's absolutely the right thing, because there are elements of investigations, of how that needs to be handled to make sure that's going to be done correctly, that actually we do rely on the knowledge and skills of the police to ensure that that's going to be dealt with effectively. And so it is that interrelation that we have that hopefully means each situation is dealt with and led by the most appropriate agency.
That's really encouraging, but the description of it'll be led by whoever's appropriate just gives me a little bit of concern. If it's any comfort, we've all been scared by sergeants, to be fair. Councillor Wilcox.
I think to add to that, Chair, it's been really encouraging that the police have really shown a willingness to want to actually gain more knowledge in this area, and the fact that we're going to have ongoing training and development for all the people working within the hub, I think is really encouraging. So I think the very fact that they want to have more knowledge and know what the procedures are fills us with confidence that actually will be able to make those difficult decisions when they need to be made. One thing we can't do is hesitate when we need to take action. We need to be able to do that. And I think the more knowledge that they have and the more understanding of the system they have, I'm sure they'll be able to do that. So we are confident that as the service develops, as the training and coaching develops between them all, having in the same place is always better than having people sitting on their own in a place that hadn't got anyone to actually discuss something with. Having someone next to them and say, actually, what do you think we should be doing here? I think will really benefit the system. And I think that having one or two heads is better than one in making those judgments that need to be made, in a swiftly time.
Like I say, I think it is very encouraging. Councillor Edgeller.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for your report. It was very, very interesting. Yes, I only reiterate what Paul said about the visit to the marsh. I found it very, very useful. And also, actually, with Chairman's permission, I would like to go and spend a day there, because I understand that we can go there and spend a day, probably on a Saturday, and find out more about what's going off and how it works. And so with your permission, Chairman, I would like to do that. Excuse me, and being partner governor to the Midland Partnership Foundation Trust from the county, I found it interesting that they've got a team there for safeguarding in MASH, which I didn't know. So that's something new that I've learned, which was really. But can I bring you back to the housing situation? Now, you said there was housing in there. Now, last week I visited the Voice Project, and we were discussing education actually, but housing came into it. And one of the young people had put on a report that like 16 and you're going out in the big wide world, you're leaving care and you want to get on to, moving on in your adult life. But it puts moving into hostels is not the right and I thought this is really a safeguarding issue for children that's moving out of care into the big wide world and being put in a hostel is the worst place that you could possibly put a child in a situation like that. So with you saying about the housing team being in there, if we have got children that's gone missing or whatever, will you be looking at the housing situation with that in mind? Thank you, Chairman.
So, obviously, I do know that the children's situation, I know children's services are looking specifically as well into how they house their young people leaving care. So I just want to be really clear, at the moment, housing aren't currently in the MASH. We're working with them to bring them into the MASH. So I just want to make that clear. But we have developed much stronger links with them, so they will be coming in. And absolutely, if the housing isn't right, so I've been working with somebody, obviously supporting a social worker with this very issue. It is a person who's actually 21, not a care leaver, I'd like to mention. They're older, but housing is part of the reason why they're at risk from a safeguarding perspective, because they're not in safe housing. So that is being dealt with through our safeguarding inquiries and looked at and reviewed, and we're working alongside, and I have to say, very effectively with colleagues and also with some, I would like to mention there in particular Stafford Borough Housing, who work very effectively and I think quite innovatively with people who are homeless as well, which is good to see.
Thank you for that. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you. My hearing got the better of me at the MASH visit, to be honest. Notwithstanding that, it was clear that the culture is very keen on working together. That really shone out, and I was grateful for that. Thank you. There was a response to one of Paul Snape's questions which just raised a concern for me. Now, I fully understand that those in the adult team cannot look at the notes of those in children's team. But moving from a child to an adult is an artifact. It's a human construct. It's a date of birth. And thereafter, if there's then no access to when that adult was a child, to their notes, that could lead to a lack of information that would be appropriate. I mean, somebody in their mid-30s not being able to look at their notes when they were 15 years of age strikes me as being inappropriate, because it's 20 years ago. So I'd just like your view on that. My second thought is that it's certainly true of troubled families, and I expect it's true of many of the clients that you have to deal with, and that's that they move around a lot. And one of the reasons they move around a lot, if you move from one borough to another, you've effectively got to start at ground zero again. And now we have no control over what another place will do, but what's our protocol? What do we expect of ourselves if somebody moves to another local authority, or in the cases of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, another jurisdiction in the British Isles? How do we respond to that? Now, they may be few and far between, but we've got to cover every avenue. That's it. Thank you.
Absolutely. So just with regards to the access to records, so we can obviously request access to the records. So there's no, if we ask for access for information about a person, that's reviewed by, sort of children's, and we get that. Obviously, the person themselves can access their records. Obviously, that's obviously through those access to records. And phrase has gone out of my head. Thank you. So they can. It's an odd thing, isn't it, that in a local authority, as an adults worker, I don't have a children's care director licence to access those records. That's just the way it works. My login is for adults. That's what I see. Now, some of our teams, and again, I would say the preparation for adulthood teams, so those who work with young people going through transition, they do have that access. They do have dual access. So where it's of need on a regular basis, they do have that. We do also seek to get read-only access for people as well. So we are looking at that, say, for our advanced practitioners, etc., in the MASH, so they would be able to see them. Obviously, they wouldn't be able to add or change anything, but they wouldn't need to. But then, hopefully, then any safeguarding risks, etc., can be picked up that way. And I think that's important. But it is something, and it is something we talk about quite often. It's the same if, I don't like to mention another potential problem, but you know me, I am honest. With people who are open to our mental health teams, the majority of their records are on Rio and not on Care Director. So we have that problem as well, and we are working around that, and we are getting access to Rio for our safeguarding teams. It's taken a while. Don't get me started, but we are nearly there now. So it's been a labour of love, that has. But it is getting those things sorted that I think is really important, so that when we are able to make defensible decisions at those early stages, and that we're not missing out on that information, which, you know, with some people, what's happened to them as a child really does impact on their situation now, and we can't lose sight of that. So these things are reviewed. On your second point, with regards to people moving between areas, the Care Act actually really helps us with this, because it makes it clear to us what our responsibilities are, even moving between jurisdictions as well, over how we should be engaging with people. So if we know somebody from our local authority is moving into another local authority, the Care Act makes it clear we should be giving sufficient time for people to be able to do an assessment, other people to get involved to complete that assessment. If we're not aware that somebody's moved, then we should maintain our relationship with them whilst the other service, the other local authority, begins their work with them. We shouldn't just cut them off because they're now no longer in our area. And so we do have some processes and protocols. Obviously, from a safeguarding point of view, we relate to ongoing risk within our area. But again, we should be making sure that we transfer that information across. I work with this far more frequently from my prisons team perspective, because my prisons team are often working with other local authorities. So we have sort of processes and protocols in place for moving out of Staffordshire prisons into other local authority areas. So we have hopefully enough guidance around it. It's not foolproof though, and we do, you know, people do leave our area without us knowing. People come into our area without us knowing, not always because of fault of other local authorities. And sometimes, you know, people are free, aren't they, to move and to come into their area. But there is some sort of guidance within the Care Act which helps us with things such as ordinary residency, what our responsibilities are. So just to give you a bit of an example, there is a part in the Care Act that says we should meet urgent needs even prior to doing an assessment and before establishing ordinary residency where there is that need. So if somebody comes into our area and it's clear that they have urgent needs that must be met, we should meet them before we complete an assessment, before we have established ordinary residency. Just in the short term, obviously, whilst we then establish all of that, but we should be ensuring we meet those urgent needs. And that's the same for us, it's the same for all local authorities. So that should offer some safeguards.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wildman.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is a question about the Lado service, which came up at the Ofsted report, and it's connected with the performance audits or monitoring that you'll do at the MASH. So I think from this report we can see that there's going to be some analysis of the timeliness of response to safeguarding concerns, which is obvious. Why did we let the Lado service sort of end up in a situation where, according to Ofsted, not all cases have a multi-agency safeguarding meeting? How do we miss that capacity issue? Was it because we just didn't have the performance data or information about capacity available to us, or did we just think, do you know what, it's not as much of a problem as we think? But Ofsted actually did think it was a problem. Thank you.
I am sorry, because Lado isn't in my area, so that sits very squarely with children's. So unfortunately, I don't feel I'm in a position to be able to answer that. I am sorry. Obviously, from a DASM perspective, we have learnt from some of that information that's come back from the LADO concerns raised by the inspection that's been completed for children's services. That's why we're refreshing our governance arrangements, our documents around that, and actually when and how we hold meetings, etc. We will be doing those audits of our cases that related to our adult position of trust issues, but I am sorry I can't answer that particular question.
Slightly. I'll go again. Which, if you have capacities in your area, so adults, would that be picked up with the new performance framework data that you're going to find?
So just so I'm clear, I am sorry, just so I'm clear, so if with our new performance, with the way we're going to be reviewing the functions within our MASH, within the adults MASH, we will be obviously including the DASM side of that within there. Now, as I say, the DASM links very closely to LADO, so quite often there's a crossover between the work that we do with LADOs, because quite often people may work within both the children's or have contact with vulnerable adults as well. So quite often there is that view, and where we have that again, we will be looking at those multi-agency audits, etc., to have a look at those. But our performance is going to be quite separate now to our children's colleagues. So that might be something just to consider. We are looking at how we align them, so you have the same sort of information from a children's and an adult's perspective. But ours are going to be separate arrangements from that perspective. But I'm not sure that I've answered your question. Kind of, ish. Sorry.
Figuring out when we have capacity issues, are we aware of them? Because it would be strange, and LADO's a bit of a red herring now, isn't it? But if you take what happened in that service, shouldn't have really happened. We should have picked up on that beforehand, and it shouldn't have needed to be picked up by Ofsted.
Yeah.
You'd have thought that somewhere in the system there would have been some data that said, you know, the LADO service is overwhelmed, we can't do what we need to do, therefore we need to potentially increase capacity. It could have been a kind of something that we resolved before it was seen by Ofsted. So the question would be, do we have any sort of data? You might not call it performance data, but you might call it capacity data, which could show senior colleagues, actually we've got a problem in this service, we need to increase capacity, therefore that sort of thing.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
That does make sense. I'm so sorry that I had to get you to explain that so much.
It's me, not you.
So, certainly, yeah, that is one thing. As you all know, we've suffered at times with capacity issues throughout our early safeguarding sort of response time. So, actually, capacity is something that we are monitoring, and that will be the same from a DASM perspective as well. That's why we need to refresh everything, because we don't have at the moment any clear parameters that we feel comfortable managing, because we only have one DASM for adults, which works okay. I don't want to set hairs running. It works okay, but we need to be obviously monitoring those pressures within that team for that person, and also ensuring that the records that are being maintained correctly. So from an administrative perspective, that's why we're reviewing, refreshing, and making sure we have got that within that. That will form part of our sort of KPIs, etc. So it will be part of our performance.
Thank you for that. Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Mine's more of, I think, an observation maybe, rather than a question as such. I remember when I first got on this council in 2017, going to the MASH, and the MASH was a hub then, in my opinion. It was full of people, they were talking to each other, and they were sharing information with each other, as Mike's just said earlier on. On going to the MASH the other week, it was a desolate, empty building. There was a couple of people downstairs in one room, a couple of people in a big room. There was a few people upstairs, but no one was having these discussions and talking to one another and that. And so I can't see how we've moved forward by putting these changes. I know we've had difficulties because of COVID and that, but surely everybody should be coming back into this hub now, and they should be talking to one another, not working from home all the time. And I just don't think that the MASH is going to work if people carry on working from home. And I also think as well, I'm quite disappointed that we're not working with Stoke-on-Trent anymore, because my area, where I represent, backs onto Stoke-on-Trent, and it's literally a quarter of a mile away from me. And I come under Stoke-on-Trent for a lot of things, as well as Stafford. And now I feel like I'm sort of torn in two halves. So I don't know how we can improve that. Thank you.
So I would agree about people needing to be in the MASH, and that is how it's going to be. They did only move across on the 1st of April, and unfortunately I do know, obviously, leave, because it was the Easter breaks as well, which doesn't always reflect well. But we are ensuring that people are going to be present within the office, because for me that was the way it worked when I was there, you know, and it does work well. It works best. I know we can work virtually, but actually from a relationship building, from a team building perspective, which is what this needs, you need to be with people. You can work away from people for short periods of time, and I'm not saying everybody needs to be in the office all day, every day, of course not, but there needs to be a presence and a team within the office every day, so that we're quite a large team now. When I was an AP, if I wasn't there might not be anybody there, because there was only 2 of us, so, you know, back in 2011. But now, you know, there's 8 people, you know, for SAS, there's 10 within the asset team. There should always be people around to be having those, and we are making sure that we work with partners so that we're aligned, and also that we have a lot of time where we're all together, and that's in person, because I don't think digital responses can do the same as being in. And our teams are supportive of that, you know, and obviously we do that within the sort of any health and safety needs of people, etc., to make sure that we've got good, safe working environments and desks that are set up, etc. So I think it is going to hopefully develop over the time. Hopefully if you come back and see us again, I know that on that particular day, I know I was most probably one of those people in the office by the time I came out of my meeting. I think you'd all left, because I popped up the stairs and you'd all gone. I went, oh no. So, you know, there are, you know, I think we do need to be making sure, but hopefully you'll see that if you were to come again in that way. I can't disagree with your comments about Stoke-on-Trent, but we are where we're at, and it makes it very difficult. We can't dictate as well to another local authority over how they want their working relationships to be. But what I would say is that we do have very good working relationships between the safeguarding services, between the 2 local authorities. We are still sharing information. We are still engaging with people, you know, with each other. And those are the assurances that I think, you know, that hopefully will continue. Again, that's why it's important that we keep on engaging with them, keep on involving them within some of those meetings, so that actually we can keep abreast with any developments from their perspective. And if we are having any difficulties with communication or are identifying concerns from that point of view, then hopefully, you know, we can address those. I would also, you know, I have also requested that they take part in our multi-agency audits as well, so that we keep doing this work together, because for me that's really important. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. That's really, really encouraging. I don't think there was any others. No. Oh, sorry, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Sorry, this is the first time I've come onto this group, so it's all new to me, so it's just a learning curve at the moment. But I visited the MASH with the rest of the councillors, and I've got to be honest, it was quite sparse, but they did explain to us that it's half term and that they were all just moving in and such like. But I felt when we were downstairs in the room, there was 2 people downstairs explaining what works they were doing. I found it really positive, because to me that's just come into, I know you all probably know a lot more than what I do, but to me that came into it, I could feel like I could go to them and say, I've got this vulnerable person here who needs this help, can you direct me to the people I need to speak to? And I found that quite positive. So I enjoyed the visit, and I'd like to go back as well on a Saturday if it's possible, please. Thank you.
Councillor Wilcox.
I think, Chair, I think Councillor Burnett is right. I think there are certain functions that we do as a county where we need to be actually visibly together. And there are others where we don't need to, and remote working can work. So I think over time you will see that we will be bringing people back in to the one place, because I do believe that having that connection and being able to discuss with colleagues face to face, I think adds value to it. Just one other thing just to mention to you, going back to what Councillor McMahon said about sharing of information. Councillor Mark Sutton, responsibility for children and young people, and myself brought a paper to Cabinet yesterday about looking at a new case management system, a joint case management system for adults and children together that we're developing on the back of the fact that our existing operator has decided they want to exit the market. So we have the opportunity through a new procurement arrangement now to make sure that a new agreement, when we bring it forward in November 2027, will have all the components within it and all the information from all the partners within it that will give us a much better system where we can talk to all and we can see everything. And we can bring in more digitalisation into that, and we can make the actual offer for the customer that uses it, our residents, a better experience. So I think that is something that's really exciting, because I think it will bring adults and children closer together in that sharing of information, so that we don't have the situation where they go from childhood into adults where we're missing that opportunity. We will have all that information hopefully in one place where we can hopefully access it much better. So that's really good, and that's being developed as we speak, and that went to Cabinet yesterday afternoon. Yesterday morning.
Was it yesterday morning?
Now, that sounds really good. I think that certainly is the way forward. Give the last word to Councillor McMahon.
Thank you. There's a window of opportunity here, I think, in terms of the software and what you use, and that's other agencies. We ought to be able to read each other's stuff. Not everybody, but particularly those in the MASH. And health ought to be able to read our stuff, and vice versa, on a strictly confidential basis. And I just wonder if that opportunity avails itself with this new proposal, because we don't want to miss out on that, do we?
No. I'd like to say, Chair, that yes, it will, and I might well be speaking out of turn here, because it may not. And Councillor Sutton may well, when he comes to the table, you may well be able to ask him the same question. But I hope that we can have a system where we can share all that information, because we're all working for the same goal at the end of the day, protecting people and making sure that, you know, that all that happens. And we have so many lessons that have been learned from cases where it's gone wrong, where there hasn't been a sharing of information, that you would think that we could move into that system and to that way. Whether it's legislation that would stop us doing that, I don't know. But my hope would be that we could definitely get a much better case management system where everybody talks to everybody and all the information is in one central place that we can all access easier.
Councillor McMahon, I think you wanted to come back.
Just very briefly, thank you. Data protection is clearly very important, but in these circumstances, it's so often used as an excuse not to do the right thing. So I don't think it can be taken for granted.
Thank you for that. Also think, oh, sorry, Ruth.
Correct me now.
I'm not going to correct you because I'm not close enough to the detail of that, if I'm honest. But what I would say is that One Health and Care that we do now use has really opened up our the doors to information from health and from other agencies that we haven't previously had access to. So hopefully some of those concerns that people may have previously had about the sharing of information, or, can we access this, what can we do? Now, it's not foolproof, but actually for my safeguarding teams, One Health and Care has proved invaluable, being able to identify where people are, whether they have had recent contact with health services, how they've actually been, if they were in hospital, have they now been discharged, all of these things that really help us to assess risk and look at what's happening. So I do hope that actually we can use some of this knowledge and experience that we have as we move forward to develop the new system, to see what the art of the possible may be, I suppose.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think just by way of wrapping up, thank you for the report and thank you for coming along and answering all of those questions, being under the microscope for an hour. I would remind everyone that this is an area of business that certainly every report I've seen is consistently good. And I do think that these arrangements will only help to further improve that. I think it is encouraging to see the way that it's going. I think all of those slight difficulties that we've all already identified sound like we already know about them, and I think that's half the battle. I'm going to sound like a bit of a scratched record now, because for the last almost 2 years, I have always complained, and it is a criticism that's been made not only by me, but by outside people, that we don't always get the data and the performance right. We end up with reports that talk about different things. And I just wondered, right at the very beginning, Councillor Wilcox, you were saying you wanted to know our views about how we can improve this. I just wonder if there was any opportunity for us to have some discussions and input into what that data should look like, because I do think it is all in the data. We wait, it sounds great. Whether it works or not is another question. I have every confidence it will. But I think if we've got some peer-reviewed data or something that says this is how other areas do it, that would be ideal for us to reassure ourselves as we move forward with it. So I think that would be my request to you if you are interested in how we see this developing as well.
Chair, I was waiting for you to bring that up, because I know full well that around data that many of you have had issues in the past. Yeah, we want to work with you. We want to make sure that the data you get is relevant and that you have some understanding and it means something to you and us. And at the same time, I really want to pay sort of tribute to Ruth and her team who do and have done a fantastic job and still are doing a brilliant job for us in the MASH and all the work that they do elsewhere apart from that. So, you know, long may that continue. But I do think, yeah, we want to work with you, and we do want to bring information that is relevant to you and that you can get, you know, really get into it. And I know, as being part of this committee, it's really close to me that we make sure we do that. The one other thing I forgot to say at the beginning was Councillor Paul Northcott would normally have been here today, but he's at another safeguarding, so I think his apologies probably just need to be noted as well. But no, we're more than happy to come back at whatever interval, Chair, and happy to have that conversation with you as to what sort of data you and your committee would like to see going forward. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you for that. And I think we would echo those views about the hard work that's been put in. Ruth, I'll give you the final word then. That's it.
Oh, don't give me the final word. Oh, that's leaves me with some sort of task to do. I just want to say, just with regards to the data, if it would be helpful, once we pull together the data we intend to produce, if we share that with this committee, you can have a look to see as to whether that's going to be useful for you, and then give feedback on what else, what different, what changes, or, you know, if that would be of benefit. As I say, and I genuinely mean it, I don't want this to sound like I just say it as lip service, I really value this committee for keeping me and my teams working, and working to make sure that actually we are delivering what the expectations of our local communities are. You know, you are that really key foundation for, you know, the links that we have to that. So that opinion and those views back, if we can work together to ensure that we all feel assured, or not, when things aren't, you know, if things don't go, because I'm a bit like you, I say this all looks good, we're all very confident at the moment, but we all know that these are challenging times, and so this may, well, hope, you know, like I say, I'm sure it will work, but we may come across difficulties going forward, and we are going to need to work together to make sure that we can keep safeguarding our communities as best as we can. Thank you.
Thank you again. Item 5 then. April MASH visit feedback. Just let our guests take their thing. No. You'd be glad to know, yeah? Yeah. Thank you. This, unfortunately, I couldn't make the MASH visit, although I have been to a MASH previously. It came from what I thought was a very critical report from the independent chair of, I think, Children's Services, I think, wasn't it, around that. And I found it quite shocking, as I'm sure most of the members did. We then had the head of MASH describe the report as something that he didn't recognise, and there was then an extension, an invitation to come and visit and see for ourselves. I'm incredibly grateful for all of those members who did turn up and have a look. Really, I'd just be interested, and I know we've already heard a few views in the last item, but I'd be interested in hearing what your views were from those who went along. Paul, do you want to start?
They were very professional. They were open. They came across. If I look from the police point of view, the superintendent had done her homework. She'd done research. She'd watched our last committee meeting. She'd made a note. She knew what the questions we'd asked, and she was ready to answer those questions. The downstairs, which is the first reports, I think it was Sam, said how great they really were at referring. They knew they were people who had been there a long time. I think they said something like 50 years between them in the department. They knew what was going on and where they were coming from. I must echo Gill's comments. It was like the Marie Celeste when we looked, really. And just because it's half term, to me, isn't a reason to being there. It's a 24/7 department. So that doesn't, to me, hold any water. Just because it's half term, it doesn't mean they can all stay at home. Police officers, hospital staff, solicitors even have to work during half term. So everybody else should do as well, sort of thing. It's such an important thing as safeguarding children and adults. My views, having been there before, the answers I got were far superior to the answers I got previously. They did seem to be working together, and that's what it is all about. So I came away feeling very reassured. What Clive had told us seemed to be the most important thing, and it did seem to go through, where the initial reports from the independent perhaps didn't hold as much water. I'm not saying who is right, who is wrong. It'll be the long term where we see what goes on.
So generally, we're quite reassured by what
I was
see.
reassured. That's my personal view. I mean, I've got to be honest. We were all there. We all asked different questions. It's a committee, and I would never try to speak for the whole committee.
Councillor Geller.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I only agree with what Paul said, actually. You know, it was a very good visit. I think, and the feedback we've had on what we've had back from them, which is that the slides and everything was quite interesting, so we've got that information there moving forward. And as again, I come back to saying that I'd like to spend a day there, and probably some of the other members would actually, just to pick up a little bit more as to the information that we can add to this committee. So I shall be in touch probably with your permission, Chairman, with Clive Cormant for us to arrange to go on Saturday. And and learn a bit more about what's happening. Yeah, thank you.
So on.
Thank you. I found it very interesting. I hadn't been there before. I echo the points around the working from home situation. I would say it was a Friday. So if you combine Friday and half term, in any workplace these days, that is probably going to be quiet time. Nevertheless, it's a concern I think we have. There are a couple of points that I raised around information sharing and specifically asked them the question about whether they recognised the comments that were in the independent chairman's report. I think there was an acknowledgement that they did recognise those comments actually. So his comments were stood up if that's a question. Is that the right term? There was an acknowledgement, I think, that they were on an improvement journey. So a couple of things. One is I was concerned about the fact that police teams were moving in over the last few weeks, and that was going to be part of the new arrangements. And I was surprised that that hasn't been the case for years, because we always hear of the MASH as something that's been going on for, a decade or more. So that was a concern for me, that we were only just doing it now. And the second point, around performance and auditing, again, it seemed to me that was something that was only coming in place over the last few months. And I unfortunately think that is a result of the additional police scrutiny that's been had over various reports. I don't know the names of them, but I know that there's been reports made about the police. That report, and also the Ofsted report for Children's Services, which I think might have pushed some new arrangements. So, whilst I was reassured by what I heard, I think there were a few signs that actually we're still on a journey here, and it still needs to be scrutinised carefully. One thing that was raised by the police superintendent, if that's her right title, that there was an issue prior to when we attended the MASH, that there was a large backlog in data being uploaded from kind of police central database about certain individuals that might have safeguarding concerns, and that there was a huge backlog in actually bringing that data and sharing it with our children's safeguarding teams. I think 18 months was the time frame there. So within that period, there might be data which is held by the police, which is not therefore being shared with other colleagues who might need it. The police superintendent did say that had improved dramatically recently, and that backlog was much reduced compared to that. So that again was assuring, but it was a bit like, we've had problems in the past, actually quite serious problems. We haven't really brought them to your attention, but we are improving them. And I think that was it from my perspective, other than the point Johnny raised just in the last session there, which was around the lack of an integrated system for sharing data. So they use a standalone information sharing log, which is a system created by our IT providers, not even our IT providers, sorry, our own IT team. So it was an in-house system. They said it was functional, and it did provide them the system that they required to share data. So there weren't concerns there, but they did definitely acknowledge that they would like some form of integrated system where they could see each other's data in real time, rather than having to go into a system and rely on partners to upload things. So that was definitely something we should keep an eye on as a committee in the next few years. Yeah.
Thank you for that. It sounds like it was quite reassuring then, is the message I'm getting, although there are areas to improve. And I think, as Councillor Geller said, if there is an invitation to go back at some stage in the future, I'll make a proposal that perhaps we do that, not immediately, but we set a date and a time, and for all those who are interested, just to get those reassurances that, well, it is working well and it is doing what we hope it to do. And bear in mind what we've just said as well, it is in a time of turmoil and people moving from one place to another. Also, hopefully, the working from home and some of the difficulties that causes, it sounds to me like those are being addressed, and maybe another visit in, I don't know, 3 months' time, 6 months' time, just to see how things have improved. Councillor Geller.
Thank you. Can I just ask the colleagues on the committee, actually, the police colleagues that's been worked in the police. I was talking to a friend of mine who has been working in Holland, actually, forensics from the police side, and they have a national database, so they get they can get information from anywhere in Holland and what have you. But here we've got 46, different police areas. How do they share information, or I'm just wondering, you know, if you could answer that with your police hat on. Thank you.
Snape?
They don't, is one way to put it, really. Each of the 43 forces are different, but there is what's called the National Police computer. So let's say if an adult is arrested for anything, there's a check done there. All the convictions are there, all the arrests there. So that is a national thing they can go into. But most forces share what they need to share, unfortunately. There's also other databases there which say, I mean, there may be database which I don't know about. I've retired 16 years, Bob about 11, 12 years, haven't you, Bob? So things may have changed, sorry, Chair, since then. But the police national computer is the one which every officer on the street can have access. They stop somebody, want to do a stop search, whatever it is. They can do a check on that person. It'll come back if they're known of a disqualified driver, is a warrant, is a sexual, whatever it is. So that is there for every police officer, every police station in the country.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think that's probably a conversation for another day as well, because there's all sorts of things, and we might be moving off the topic of the MASH. Councillor Pardash, was your question to do with that?
More of a comment, really. Like everyone else on the visit, I was reassured that this is a much more positive move, especially in terms of information sharing, which sadly is usually one of the outcomes of serious case reviews, that constant lack of sharing information. But just to say, I'm not overly concerned about the number of people who were there. Information sharing is verbal, and face-to-face information sharing is part of that process. There are many other ways of sharing information, and in an office base or whatever like that, people have annual leave, they have caring responsibilities, they're out in the field, and we need to be a little bit more flexible as well in how we expect people to work in order to attract the best possible people we can. So we don't want to be having people in a hub like that for the sake of being there, although it is important sometimes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I remember, Councillor, it was a criticism that people visited police stations and there was no police officers there. And we should celebrate that because they were out doing what they're supposed to be doing. Right. How about then if we were to try to arrange another visit in around 6 months' time? We'll do that. Thank you. Item 6 then, move on to the work programme. What we're trying to, we have a meeting in June, which I'll just ask Helen to talk us through. But part of that meeting in June also, we would like to be in a position to at least have some structure to the meetings as we go forward. So I would welcome any suggestions of items that members would like to explore. I think one of them hopefully will be the final report around children's services. We'll see where we are with that in a second. Helen, could you just remind us what's on?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the June meeting will be your first of the new municipal year. So we will do, the main part of the meeting will be work programme planning, so trying to plan your work programme for the forthcoming year. There are a couple of items that have been on this particular work programme that haven't actually been allocated a meeting yet, so they will roll over. One is the domestic abuse contract. You wanted to look at that 6 months on to see how it had come into or how it was working. That's been penciled in for July. But again, it's up to yourselves and we can discuss that at the June meeting. And hearing the voice of the child is another one that we haven't allocated a time for. Depending on, well, you've discussed today about the outcome of the MASH, so there's no further work on that imminently, and we'll look at putting another visit in the future. So it's mainly to highlight to yourselves that the June meeting is going to be largely looking at your work programme planning. So bring any items or requests or areas that you wish to look at, and that we can consider trying to put those and programme those in for the next year. Thank you.
Councillor McMahon.
I may be speaking out of turn because I don't know if we're entitled to look at this. But Ruth did mention prisons. And we know that there's a lot of people who are particularly vulnerable in prison. And I expect that there's a lot of safeguarding issues in prison that never see the light of day.
Here, here.
And I do wonder whether that is something that we can look at, whether we can get the appropriate people to come and present themselves to the committee is another matter. But the prison population in Staffordshire is quite high, and as elected members on behalf of our residents, I think that if we're legally entitled to, then it's something that we ought to consider.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think we perhaps need to work up what that needs to look like. I'm sure there's an equivalent of Ofsted for prisons or whatever it might be. So maybe we can go away and have a look at that and then bring a proposal back. Councillor.
Yes, just to add to what John has just said, actually, we've got 8 prisons in Staffordshire, which is quite high compared to with other counties in the area. So I really appreciate what you said, and having gone through the system with my son with this prison service and that, I really appreciate what you just said, because I visited actually Parkhurst prison a few years ago with Neil Carr, and went into this building there, walked in there, and when we came out, I was in tears, to be honest with you, and he said, what did you think of that, Anne? And I said, there's more people on the outside that should be in there because all those people in that building were suffering with mental health problems. So, yeah, so I appreciate what you just said, Johnny. Thank you.
Councillor Snape.
I was actually told it was 9 prisons with the youth offending one as well. And the High Sheriff is responsible for prisons. That's one of the roles that goes with the High Sheriff. So liaising with them, I'm sure we could get access into them. When I was a legal advisor, one of my things, speciality was in prison law, representing prison in prison. And I go exactly what Anne and Johnny have just said, really. It would be good to look at that. And of course, in Stafford, we've got the prison that houses more sex offenders than any other prison in the county, in the country. So really, there were people who could be, I'm going to put it, a danger of abuse from other prisoners who are in there, really. So it could be something very different to look at, but also that could help a lot of people.
Councillor Burnett had the last word, but I think we'll certainly work something up.
Could we incorporate that with probation services as well? Because I think there's a big connection there, and when these prisoners or offenders come out and then they go back in again and they mix together and all sorts of things go on. So I think that would be interesting.
Mr. Walman.
On a completely different topic entirely, but I wonder, we always have reports from officers and cabinet members or independent chairman of the Children's Safeguarding Board, and it's quite rigid in terms of where we get reports from. I wonder whether we perhaps look at inviting partners or third sector organisations to present to us about their experiences of using our whole children's services system, so that we can get a different perspective on how it is out there in the real world. And I wonder whether that might be.
Yeah, we did something similar with care providers, didn't we, not so long ago. So I think that would be useful. If you have some detail around that, then please share that with us, and we'll have a look at that. You know, precisely what you wanted to look at. All done? Thank you. We'll move on then to item 7, exclusion of the public. the chairman to move. The public are excluded from the meeting for the following items of business, which involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in the paragraphs of Schedule 12A, as amended, of the Local Government Act 1972, indicated below. Yep, we'll come back, grab a coffee and then come back.